Hello and welcome to everyone that's just turned up on Zoom. We're just gathering ourselves for tonight, so feel free to think that you're part of the audience as we just get people seated and ready to go. If you have any trouble with the audio, please type that through and they will let us know. But I think the audio should be coming out to everyone on Zoom now. Excellent. Well, I think we're getting very close to starting, so I might just begin proceedings for everyone. I think there's just a couple more people who will be arriving, but that's okay. Just while we're waiting for people to arrive, the Zoom people, you will be on mute for the entire journey, but you can use the chat function to ask questions and those will be texted through to me. So just remember that the chat function is where you can ask questions, and very soon Louis will be sending a chat message to show you where that is, and that will have a link to the book on it. So that's for the Zoom people. For the in real life people, if you want to turn your phones to silent now, that'd be great. And for everybody, if you feel like social mediaing, we are at Avid Reader for 101. So please feel free to tweet at us, to Instagram at us, or to Facebook at us. I don't think that's exactly how you say it, but I'm beginning to feel more and more like an old person every single day. I don't even know how to use TikTok. And please someone teach me, because I think that would be awesome. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to start tonight. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on. In this area, it's the Yagara and the Turrbal people, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to mention that because we're on Zoom, we are zooming out onto the lands of many different Aboriginal people, and I'd like to acknowledge their elders as well. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and sovereignty was never ceded. Now, to continue our storytelling tradition over here at Avid Reader, I'm going to pass you on to the wonderful Cass Moriarty, who will be the mistress of ceremonies tonight. So Cass Moriarty is the author of The Promised Seed and Parting Words, and she is a prolific reviewer and does many in conversations for Avid Reader. Excellent. Just a little bit of technical stuff there. So Cass Moriarty has been missing of late. We've been missing Cass, but we are really, really excited to have her back at Avid Reader. This is your first time here for months. So welcome to Cass. And Cass will do Emily's intro, but I would just like to say that Emily Maguire is one of our very favourite authors here. We are always excited to have a visit from Emily. She is delightful and she is also an amazing writer. So I'm going to pass on to Cass to sing more of her praises as we talk about Love Objects, her new book.
Introduction, and thanks everybody for being here. It is really good to be back in the store in person, and you know, thank you for making the effort to come, for buying books, for tweeting about this event, and all of the support that you give the literary community. It's really a great help to authors, booksellers, publishers, everybody, so thank you for that. Now, tonight I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome author, teacher and writing mentor Emily Maguire, whose last novel, An Isolated Incident, was shortlisted for both the Stella Prize and the Miles Franklin Award. Emily has written novels, non-fiction books and essays on sex, feminism, culture and literature, which have been published widely, including in the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age and The Australian. Emily was the 2018-19 Writer in Residence at the Charles Perkins Centre at the University of Sydney. Her most recent novel, Love Objects, explores hoarding and possessions, shame and betrayal, toxic masculinity and female desire, class, judgment, appearances, family obligations, love, guilt and grief. It's an insightful, tender, confronting and very funny book. Please welcome Emily Maguire. Now, Emily, today I got a message from Annabelle Smith, who I think perfectly described your book as the love child between the trauma cleaner and the natural way of things. But then she qualified that by saying, that makes it sound impossibly dark, whereas this has a gentleness to it, a warmth and a humour. And I think that's really beautiful.
Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah, beautiful description. I wanted to start with, I don't normally do this, but I wanted to start by talking about the cover and the title. The cover, if you look carefully, those of you who haven't had a chance yet, is a woman who is disappearing into the background of various floral objects. And the title, obviously, Love Objects. What does the title and the cover, how is that representative of what this story is about? Because I think in this case it is particularly representative, both of us.
Yeah, I feel like I got so lucky with the cover. So to speak about that first, I'm not a visual person at all, and I had no kind of idea about what a great cover would be. And sort of the only brief I gave was that I just think of this main character, Nick, as someone that other people will see a mess when they walk into a place. They see clutter, they see a hoard. I think my microphone might not be working.
We're having enough of mic trouble tonight.
Is that the same? Better?
Yeah, no, it's all
Okay.
nice.
You have this slide.
Let me turn that one.
Okay, this one now. All right, is that any better? Okay. So Nick is someone that anyone else would see her home as just all this junk, all this clutter, this great big mess. Am I taking this one again? Okay. Oh, I can hear a different sound. Thank you. So, starting again. You probably all of you can hear me, but for the Zoom. So Nick is someone that anyone else would walk into her home, see mess, see clutter, but to her, there's beauty there. And the deeper that she gets into it and really thinking about each object piece by piece, the more beautiful it becomes. And that was my only kind of thinking around what sort of cover art might work. And then the designer, Sandy Cull, found this work, which is an actual literal work of art. It's hanging in a gallery, I think in Madrid, by the artist Cecilia Paredes. And that's actually her in the cover. On the cover art, she paints herself into her backgrounds. And it was just immediately so perfect because it is incredibly beautiful, although it is very busy and cluttered as well. But also it just felt so true that if this figure on the cover were to step out of it, she would look silly or messy or odd or stand out because she's got this stuff painted on her. But within her context, within her home, it's perfect. The title came quite late, after a series of failed titles, failed being I loved them and everyone else hated them. But this one is one that as soon as I hit on it, it immediately felt right because it does work on a few different levels. I mean, the most surface level is that Nick really loves her objects. She loves her stuff, and it is love, or to her, that's how she would describe it and how it feels. But there are also some different levels on that we may or may not get to.
Yeah, no, great title, I think. So you landed on the right one eventually. So the main characters in the book are Nick and her niece, Lena. What are their lives like when the novel opens? And what incident sort of abruptly ruptures the status quo of their relationship?
So Nick at the start of the novel is, I think she would describe herself as perfectly content, even happy at times. She lives alone in a home that she inherited from her mother. So she doesn't have housing stress. There's many people living in Sydney who are retail workers, which she works, she calls herself a checkout chick and has always done that work and really enjoys it and feels satisfied with that work and manages to have a home. So she's very secure. She doesn't have a lot of close friends, and her closest family member is her niece Lena, who moved away with her family to Brisbane for a long time and is now back in Sydney as a young adult at university. And it's just the joy of Nick's life to have this niece of hers back. They meet up every week for lunch, and they're very, very close. So to both of them, everything seems great and good. And the thing is that when Nick goes home to her home each day, her home that she loves and where she feels really safe and secure, there is all this stuff. And I guess on some unconscious level, she's stopped inviting people back there, knowing that they might not react to it the same way. So when she has a bit of a fall and can't get up again, she's sort of trapped in her stuff and under her stuff. And it's only then that Lena's sort of forced to come to the house to find out why her auntie hasn't turned up to something, and discovers how she's been living. And immediately to Lena, as it would be to many people, this is a shock. This is something terrible. Not just that her aunt's been injured, but the house itself, that it's so full of stuff. It's a crisis that needs to be solved. And so the book kind of proceeds from there, that Nick sort of feels like she's been exposed in a sense as having done something terribly wrong, which doesn't feel true to her because she's been living perfectly happily. All she's done is had an injury.
Yeah, but she has a hoarding disorder, I guess would you say that? Or
well, I sort of am trying to remain a bit agnostic on the diagnosis of it. I mean, hoarding disorder is something I've spent a lot of time studying it with the Charles Perkins research fellowship that I had, and it was incredibly valuable to understand that there's certainly a category of people. Feel that sound just got different.
Yes, I think you need to put it
Closer? Okay. There's a category of people whose hoarding behaviour is very similar to each other, and they can certainly be grouped together. And that has just since 2013 been put in the DSM-5, the psychiatric manual, as its own disorder, hoarding disorder. And Nick certainly fits those patterns of behaviour. But there are also people who have hoarding behaviour that is caused by other things, or maybe we don't know what it's caused by, or it's related to, other conditions. And there's not great research. There's not great rate of diagnosis. There's almost no self-reporting of this kind of behaviour. So in terms of actually sticking a label on a fictional character or a living person, it's actually quite tricky. But certainly, her behaviours are consistent with that. And that is what, when she gets to the hospital and sees a social worker and all of that, that is the diagnosis that's put on her.
Yeah, I want to talk a bit later about the Charles Perkins, your time there and the research that you did. But just staying on Nick, she hoards obviously lots of different items. Some of them are things that she buys new, she buys 20 towels from Kmart or, 50 pens, and it just adds them to the pile. Some of the things are her own personal belongings that have meaning or memory for her. And I kind of understand why she would hoard them, a lock of hair or, a shirt that she had her first kiss with someone in, or, those kinds of things that have particular memories. But what I found most interesting was when she was hoarding the personal belongings that she found from other people. So when she finds one shoe or the doll's bonnet or, something that other people would just think of as junk, and yet she hoards these things. Tell us a little bit about the way her mind works in terms of, bringing those things together as a family, creating this safe and secure environment for these things.
So it's interesting because you talking about it quite understandably, you say she hoards these things, but that's not her thinking at all, of course. She's not thinking that that's what she's doing. She rescues things, she protects them, she cares for them, and she doesn't really think of them in terms of I'm accumulating all this stuff. Like each item, at least at the moment when she is deciding to keep it or to pick it up, is its own precious thing. And
you know, later, of course, they become part of this. You know, I think it's her nephew who think later in the book, like, when does it become a hoard? Like, what's the one item that's brought into the house that just stops it being a bunch of stuff? And that's part of the issue. I think sort of to the larger question of her relationship to the stuff, so I should say up front that I do know people with hoarding behaviour, and that's what got me interested in it in the first place. And I've, through the research, been lucky enough to get to know some more people and talk to them. And there's not a type, even though some of the behaviours are repeated. There is no stereotype, which is one of the things I'm kind of writing against. But in every case, any explanation that someone might give for why they're keeping something is exactly the same as what any of us here would give. It's just that it's applied to many more items, or there's not that point where they do let it go anyway. Like when you have a big clean out, there's distress. So people keep things or accumulate and keep them because they might need them one day, which we all do. Witness the great toilet paper hoard of about a year ago. I might need this. What if I run out? That'll be terrible. But that just might be applied to a lot more stuff. Or quite often someone else might need this. You know, see something, either it's on sale or even left on the side of the road. Well, you know, one of my nieces might need this. Someone might need this. There is the sentimental attachment, which we all understand, but again, applied to a much wider range of items. Like I might keep this Chucks because it reminds me of this and this lovely night we've had. Of you, exactly. And that's a really important memory. And
she can't bear for things to be abandoned, can she?
And that's the idea of the thing itself. So there's a bit of anthropomorphizing, which again, most people do to a certain extent. I've really witnessed that. If you walk out on, you know, like hard rubbish night when people put all their stuff out, if there's like a teddy bear or a doll, people go, oh, it looks so sad when it's a thing, but there's a kind of connection made. And so people who hoard can do that again with a wider range of items, just really feel like it's wrong or mean somehow to dump them. But also Nick does something which a lot of people that I've met demonstrate this, which is real thought about how the thing came into being. Like, who made this? What is the stitching on this item? What hands has this passed through? And again, that's something, you know, you might keep some old costume jewelry that a relative who has long died has passed down. It's got no monetary value. You're never going to wear it. But it feels, because of the hands it's passed through or because of who had it before, it feels wrong somehow to abandon that. And so, again, people with a lot of hoarding behaviour, they will either know that about an item or, in Nick's case, make it up. There's so much creativity often in what is the provenance of this item, and not in an antique valuable way, but literally who owned this, who loved this thing, who cared for it.
She loves the stories behind every object, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Even if she makes them up.
Yeah, and that's some of the most beautiful, touching things I found in talking to a lot of people about their stuff, is almost every item it's just holding a story, sometimes a series of stories. Sometimes it's the story of when the person got that thing, but also the story of who had it before or how it was made. These stories upon stories upon stories just hold all this often love or value or meaning. And with people who have difficulty letting go of things like Nick, there is a sort of usually unspoken, unexamined feeling that to let go of this thing will be to let go of that love or that memory or that feeling. And if something makes you feel good thinking about the little girl who owned this before, or the care that went into making it, and to think, I have this beautiful feeling when I'm holding this and thinking about it, and if I let it go, that feeling's gone forever.
Is it also for Nick about sort of filling up empty spaces in her life, you know, things that are missing, the relationship with her niece and nephew?
Yeah, I think so. And again, I tried not to be too diagnostic about it all, because again, there's usually not, almost never in my experience, is there a straight line you can draw between this thing happened to this person and therefore their behaviour is like this. But certainly something that often happens is that people, once they are on their own, living alone and also not having a lot of social interaction, if they have tendencies towards hoarding things or keeping them, then that is when it's going to really, really kick in. And so for Nick, the time when her living family, her sister and her sister's kids moved to another state, that is a traumatic time for her in terms of loss. There's a lot of loss that happens in that family. And it means there's not kids running through the house all the time. There's not people gathering around. So, you know, it's a complicated behaviour. I think there's maybe a bit of pop culture wisdom that hoarders all have some really extreme trauma, and many do, but many of humans have some trauma in their background. Like if you take any control group of people, there'll be a certain number that have that, and how to tie that into this behaviour. I think that there can certainly be an element of self-comfort, which might be what you're getting at too. And with Nick, she certainly feels safer, and she feels comforted by having her stuff around her.
And that really comes through in the book, that sense of comfort and that sense of emotional connection that she has with every single one of those items that she's almost curated. It's like she's curated her own personal sort of museum of love objects.
And if she was much wealthier and had a grand house, it would be this eclectic. It could be this really eclectic collection, like some museums, like I can't think of the name now. There's the Welcome Museum, where it's just a bunch of stuff, and some of it's incredibly valuable by objective standards, and some of it's not. But it's just all the stuff that a particular person thought was interesting and worth keeping.
So fascinating. So she creates this sort of safe and secure environment through her hoarding. On some level, she does realise that she has a problem, I think, because she doesn't invite Lena back to her house, for example, for lunch. So she must know that something's not quite right. But on another level, her behaviour is, as you say, just completely sort of, there's nothing wrong with it. It
makes her happy.
It makes sense to her, and it makes her happy. Did you find that is that a common thing with people who hoard, that they generally don't see that they
certainly the category of people who would meet the criteria for hoarding disorder, as opposed to people who are hoarding as a symptom of something else. One of the reasons that there's very low self-reporting is because people don't have a problem with it. They don't need help, or at least in their own perception, they don't want help.
So it's not that they're ashamed of it, it's that they don't actually think there's anything wrong with it.
No, the shame comes from outside, as most shame does. The awareness that other people would react. So there is an awareness for most people that this isn't how most people live, and they will react and they will judge. And so those people aren't going to be invited in. But it's slightly different from the kind of shame when someone feels if you feel in yourself, I'm not living the way I want to live, and you're ashamed for people you love to see that. It's quite different to that. It's one of the big differences that I came to understand. So up until 2013, hoarding was mostly considered a subset or a symptom of OCD, of obsessive compulsive disorder. And one of the reasons in that sort of medical psychiatric world they did kind of create this other category is because speaking to people like Nick, the way they describe the behaviour is completely different to someone with OCD, because with OCD it's a compulsion and it's unpleasant, and they actually want it to stop, but they can't stop it because it's a compulsion. Whereas someone like Nick, the only way that will stop is usually intervention from the outside. They have an accident like Nick does, or a family member says, I can't live here anymore. Or someone says, I'm not bringing your grandkids to come and play with you anymore. So it's almost always this external thing of someone saying, you can't live like this anymore. But the person themselves, the feeling they have, it's not like that feeling like, I wish I wasn't like this, I need to get rid of it.
So all of this sort of information that's informed the writing of the novel, is this was this all part of your experience at the Charles Perkins Centre? Is this where you were able to really fully explore and find out information about all of these issues?
Yeah, a lot of it. So as I mentioned, I have known some people with this kind of behaviour in my life, and have just always been fascinated by what we call hoarding, but also just that larger question of people's relationship to their stuff. I'm just really endlessly fascinated with that. And you know, could write 20 books of 20 different characters who have different kinds of relationships, you know, extreme minimalists are fascinating in their relationship to stuff in a really similar way. But I didn't want to do it in a way that would be exploitative or that would feed into stereotypes. Not that I wanted to write a self-help manual or a medical diagnostic manual. It's a novel. These are invented, created characters. But I wanted to know what I didn't know, and so that I wasn't accidentally writing in kind of harmful stereotypes. So I got to do all this research, and it was incredibly useful. First of all, that understanding, like, how does this differ to OCD when it's this kind of behaviour, and what some of the research is going into and what might cause it. All that stuff was so interesting. But the real value as I got later into that fellowship was making connections, first of all, with clinicians and social workers and people in a couple of different hospitals in Sydney who are sort of on the front lines of, if someone like Nick comes into the hospital and an ambulance has been called, they will report then this is what the home was like. It's not safe for her to go back. So how those frontline people respond. And then I was able to very slowly and respectfully be introduced to some people who were in treatment. And again, there's not that many because people don't self-identify. But the people I met through that experience were so insightful and so generous. And that really helped me a lot too in terms of just actually feeling confident that this was such a behaviour with real diversity within it too. And I sort of made a vow to myself and also to several people who I spoke to that I would never use any particular person's stories directly in this. So it was more sort of backgrounding and understanding. But I did sometimes find that I'd already written a scene with something and then someone would tell me something that was almost identical, which was really interesting experience. But it is because there's certain commonalities. I mean, and it would be the same with anyone's relationship with their stuff. You'll find people who are, you know, who also kept their 10-year-old netball jersey or whatever. Like, there's just these commonalities with people's relationship. No, absolutely not. It's great. Why only 10-year-olds?
All right, let's change tack a little bit. You're known for your writings on feminism, sex, culture, female desire, toxic masculinity. And there is another narrative in this story that explores these issues. And I'm aware that we don't want to give any spoilers for people who haven't read the book, but I just wondered if there was anything that you'd like to share with us about that topic.
Yeah, so we can sort of talk around it a little bit, I think. But so Lena, who's Nick's niece, at the start of the book, she has just moved back to Sydney to go to Sydney Uni. Although I don't name the uni in the book, but anyone who knows it can guess what it is. And it's a really huge deal for her to have got there. It's not been an easy road for her, so she's really excited. She hooks up with this really hot, wealthy, privileged guy, a couple of years older than her, has a really great time. And then he betrays her in a pretty severe way, breaches her privacy in a huge way. And so, you know, part of what I was trying to do there was give Lena, first of all, a reason to stick around and help her aunt clean up her filthy mess, as she thinks of it at the time. And having something to run away from herself was an important part of that. But in terms of the specifics of that, I really was thinking a lot thematically about privacy and shame and the different ways that can manifest and also block people. And to have these two women who both of them would say, we're more best friends than family, we're so close, we tell each other everything. And then they both have this huge thing that is making them feel intense shame, or that they think will bring intense shame on them, and to have that a secret from each other. And at one stage, Lena feels like she's holding both of those secrets at the same time as well. That felt like really interesting territory to dig into.
And certainly at the moment, so timely. You know,
well, the thing is, everyone says that, but then it's always timely.
It's always timely.
And that sucks, but it was timely when I was writing it.
It just seems like at the moment,
No, we are having a big
particularly
conversation about this
timely.
now. No, there is a big national
From
conversation, you're right.
schools to workplaces to Parliament House. It's everything from, it's issues around consent, it's bullying, all the way to, actual sexual assault. There's a whole spectrum.
Yeah, and Lena certainly, it's so hard to talk without spoilering, we'll just sort of dance around it. But she is at this kind of nexus where she's engaged in behaviour that she felt great about. There's not shame around the actual behaviour. It's this kind of particular form of, I guess it's homosocial male bonding or something, which happens afterwards with this young man and his mates that brings the shame and all that honour. And certainly that feels very, with the stuff in Parliament House and the desks and that whole thing, there is this real sense of this is everywhere. Yeah.
And at the moment, I just think women in Australia particularly are just so absolutely full of rage at what's going on. And the fact that it's tolerated, justified, explained away, just makes everybody so angry. What do you do with your anger?
I write books. I kind of said that in a glib way, but it is like literally true that I'm such a happy, cheerful, easygoing person, and I know I wouldn't be if I didn't write, because I get so much stuff out in the books.
So it all gets tunnels into the work.
Yeah. I mean, most of it does, but that doesn't mean that I don't feel it on a day-to-day level too. It can't all end up in the books. Over the years, my way of dealing with these things in terms of trying to make change, I think has really changed. I used to be a lot more writing directly to this issue, opinion pieces, that kind of writing. And I sort of really moved away from that. I started to feel like, for me, that wasn't really doing anything. It was sort of either preaching to the choir or just, but began to be this sort of landscape where it just, these little, whatever you can say in 700, 800 words, it's not very complex. And then it's just a target for people on the other side. I mean, even thinking of sides in this is pretty ridiculous. But it just didn't feel useful to me in terms of my energies. I, do write longer form and novels, which I feel for me is more able to get into the real complexities of a lot of this stuff. Because there is the legal side of things, which is something that happens to Lena or a lot of these really courageous young women who are speaking up now, where obviously the legal thing is, this is a crime, this can't happen, whatever that process should be. But in terms of people's, very often these things are happening in the context of your family or your really close friendship groups or at uni or your workplace, and the trajectory isn't always that straightforward. And having to grapple with that, having to grapple with friends and family who maybe aren't perpetrators of this stuff, but also, are bystanders, let stuff go. That's all so much more complicated. And I do think that the longer form writing and novels give a chance to dig into that.
And in terms of what the rest of us can do, the ones of us who aren't writers, what do you think is the value in things like protests, or do you think it's more about education?
It's all of that. So I guess that's the other thing I do is really try on the education side. So as much as possible, I will always accept invitations to speak at schools, particularly high schools, on pretty much anything, and try and really get those conversations going. And I think anyone can do that. Whatever your circle is that you're in, that's where you can start having these kind of conversations. Definitely protests. I mean, I don't think anyone really thinks that a protest changes anything immediately. Certainly something we saw, I think, with the most recent Women's March on Canberra and everywhere is that sense of rage you're talking about that so many women are feeling. That is a comfort to see that. Even though it's a distressing reason, it's that all these other women and girls have experienced similar stuff, which is really upsetting. There is a comfort in seeing that other people are angry about it, other people are calling it out, the numbers. I think people like Grace Tame, Brittany Higgins, when they speak out, they do give courage to other people to speak out. And not everyone can be a leader. Just it's not their personality, it's not what they want, or they just don't have the privilege to do that. There's too much to lose. But people who can stand up and be leaders, it does start to change the culture of what other people know is acceptable, the kind of questions other people know to ask, and the behaviours that people know to call out or start calling out. And I do think that things like protests are part of that, because they get the press, it's on the news, there's this flashing notice to everyone. There's a bunch of people who are really, really angry about this.
Just on that topic, you know, you write about female desire, which I think is looked at in a very different way than male desire. And I think that, you know, one of the things you explore is how that leads into shame and self-blame and all of that. What do you... I did have a question there, but I've sort of lost it. I'm trying to get at how do the two sort of go together, like the double expectation. God, I've lost my words.
Yeah. I think everyone here knows what you're
Expectations,
saying.
you know what I'm saying. The
Yeah.
expectations we have of men,
Yeah.
and the expectations we have of women in terms of desire and expressing desire, and then in terms of the shame that follows. Whatever happens.
Yeah, it's getting to the she was asking for it thing, which is what we still hear, whether those exact words or various forms of that, and we're still hearing that in
Whereas
the
if
public
he asks for
conversation.
it, that's fine.
Well, there's nothing to ask for, is there? Because there's no consequences. So it's there's just no equivalence there. That this thing that heterosexual women who happen to be attracted to men, or they don't even have to be heterosexual, any woman who's attracted to a man at any point and acts on that in full consensual pleasure in whatever context, there is a danger there that she is supposed to be aware of the whole time, that this could turn ugly, this might turn at any time, this could come against you, someone could hold it against you, people will say whatever the context is. And it's this complicated thing that women, and from a really young age, have to hold in their head at the same time, and in their bodies, in our bodies, of I can really want this and have such joy and pleasure from it, and at the same time be constantly told, if this goes wrong, you knew what you're getting into.
Yeah. I think you explained that really well in the book, much better than I tried to articulate it. Yeah.
No, I mean, it is that kind of thing, as someone called out, that we just know this, don't we? Yeah, we do just know this. And again, that's something why it's so much easier with something long form with fiction, where you can really delve into a character, and it's almost like a playing out how this situation can work in a particular context with particular people, which is and not easier, that's not the word I want, but it's maybe a better way to try and really understand the complicated dynamics of these kind of situations. It's not a situation where a young woman like Lena is just like, don't talk to men, don't get any men. I mean, she likes this guy, she's attracted to him, she's having a good time, why shouldn't she?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Look, I also wanted to talk about class, because I think that we're probably used to reading about class in English novels and maybe even American novels much more than in Australian novels. What do you want to say about how you address the issue of class in this book?
I don't know if I want to say anything in particular. It's a really good question, and I'm really interested in class and how it is talked about in this country. Like, it's so fascinating, but I don't think I have a particular thing to say about it, except I suppose that it has often been, not just with this novel, but previous novels of mine, commented on that I write a particular kind of character, and that has, not now, just to be really clear, but that has at times in the past be talked about like I'm an anthropologist or something, writing about this strange species of not very educated or wealthy people, when I have always been writing about people like me and people I know, which isn't to say my life, but I just think people, right? I didn't realise, it did take me a long time, and of course I'm not naive or stupid. I know by now that this is part of the conversation in Australian literature, that if you do write characters who aren't, you know, upper middle class pretty much, then people will assume you're making some kind of statement. But I guess the statement is that all kinds of lives are interesting and have drama and intrigue and things to care about in it.
I think some of the issues that you address, like generational poverty, unemployment, mental illness, social isolation, all of those sorts of things are very disempowering for an individual. And you frequently illustrate that in the novel by the sort of the paucitative choices that people have. You know, they have to make a decision. Do they buy the can of tuna, or do they catch the bus, or do they, you know, see the dentist for their rotten tooth, or do they pay the rent this week? Most of us here tonight, I'm assuming, probably lead fairly privileged lives where we don't have to make those kinds of decisions every day. Do you think that most Australians really understand the level of disadvantage that some other people in Australia live with?
I think that's where we run into trouble, is when we say most Australians, because it's so, we do tend to be in our bubbles.
Yeah.
So most people in a particular bubble don't realise that. But then if that is your life and your bubble, then you kind of can't believe the way people chuck money away and what they do. And I don't know statistically what most Australians, where on the spectrum, where on the level they are. I think, and I think too, there's people who have experienced that kind of living paycheck to paycheck for a time. Like certainly me, I'm not in that situation now. I'm moved beyond that, thank goodness, but I certainly had a time in my life where, you know, I wouldn't have described myself as poor at all, but it was a matter of like literally counting the coins in the wallet to see whether you could get the bus or not. But that was just, everyone I knew did that. Like it was just part of it. So again, I think it's that thing when it can look, I guess, from the privileged outside, like, oh, this is so grim and intense or something, but it's just life. And it's with something like a toothache, I think, which Will in the book gets this terrible toothache, and then it's really brought home because you can't concentrate on anything else. And that is one of those problems that has an easy fix if you have money. It's still painful when it first comes on. We're all equal when it comes to pain, but then you can fix it so easily if you have the money. And that kind of life where you just are just managing, and you still have money for drinks with your friends or whatever, but that might mean you can't, you know, get an Uber. Something goes wrong, that safety net is not there, and that's definitely a difference. And I mean, sorry, I'm just sort of going right off your question, but I think for me too, there's something in there maybe that's as interesting to me as the literal money part of class is also the values, because sometimes it can be as much about education, social capital, and all those kind of things. And one thing that a really good friend who read an early draft of this pointed out is she said, you know, if this was anyone I know, I would be like, why aren't all these people in therapy? And I think, oh, yeah, that didn't even occur to me that these people do all have, you know, ordinary trauma really in their background. There's nothing outsized really, but it wouldn't occur to them to go to therapy. And that's partly money, but it's also just, you just get on with stuff.
So when you're living that life or living that situation and everybody that you know is in a similar situation, it doesn't appear to be.
Yeah, it's just what you do. You just get on with things, and maybe you fill your house with too much stuff, or, you know, whatever other things people do to cope. Many people, you know, we can say it's self-medicating when we drink too much, or we smoke when we know it's bad for us, or, you know, people do stuff to be able to keep going sometimes. And it just, if everyone you know is doing that, it's just how you live.
So it's all a perception. It's really a perception of class. I think actually a good example of that in the book is when you talk about, or one of the characters talks about, if a rich girl wears, you know, secondhand clothes, she looks sort of edgy and cool. But if a poor girl wears secondhand clothes, she just looks poor.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe homeless or something. So yeah, it's that perception, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're almost at the time for questions. I might get a couple more in. I think that one of the other, I mean, honestly, the book covers so much, the things that we've talked about, and then, family, the duty and obligation that we feel towards family. Grief is there, betrayal and forgiveness is there. There's so many great themes. I thought that one of the overarching themes in the story was power. I thought that it was about powerful people and then the disempowered people, and how people wield their power, how they choose to perhaps abuse it, and how people who don't have that power or that agency are then, left to react to that. Do you think that that's an issue in the book, and did you mean to be? Did you set out to write about that, or was that just something that happened?
I didn't set out to write it, but it definitely comes up, and I was aware of that sort of in later drafts. And I wonder, I haven't thought about this deeply, but I wonder if that is something in just writing about relationships in general, that there's always, it's not always conscious, and it's not always someone being an aggressor, but there tends to be a mismatch of power.
Yeah, and that plays out in a whole lot of relationships in the book, doesn't it? Between the young man and Lena, and even between Nick and Lena, the aunt and her niece.
Yeah.
Who's got the power once the aunt is injured and is then reliant on her niece.
Yeah, when someone's injured, when someone is considered to have a mental illness or labelled in someone like that, definitely there's a power shift there that maybe the other person didn't even want, but they're put in this position of, you need to make decisions, you need to decide what's right for this other person. And it is an enormous power, and one that can cause great harm if it's someone who hasn't really thought about that. Yeah.
I think if I had to choose one word to describe this novel, I would say compassionate. I just think that you've managed to engage us with every single character with a level of empathy and compassion to their situation, which is really skillfully done. As a writer, what are you considering all the time when you're creating characters, and how do you forge that bond? What are the things you concentrate on forging that bond between the writer between the reader and the character?
Thank you for saying that. That's a really important value to me. So I'm glad that has come through. In terms of the writing, certainly in the first few drafts, I try not to think about that at all. It's very much trying to capture the truth of who these characters are to themselves. So in something that has 3 points of view like this book, it was each of those early drafts was really uneven. Really the first draft, all my empathy in terms of being able to get under the skin of the character was with Nick. And so when I wrote scenes with Lena, and Lena was being quite glib and chucking out her stuff, Lena was a villain. And so to sort of go back in another path and really make sure I was getting deep inside her as a character, and that, complicated lived experience of what it was to be her in that moment, with her set of knowledge, not my set of knowledge as someone who's been studying hoarding for a year, but her set of knowledge, dealing with the pressures she's dealing with, then to hope that that's what's connecting to. And so I guess when I get to the stage where I know it's going to be published and other people are going to read it, an ideal thing for me in this book would be for people, to say that there's no villain in this. I do think, and I think this is something getting older too, is to think there's conflict, which you need for a story, but sometimes I think most of us here will probably have the experience that the hardest, most upsetting conflicts often are when people you love or care about and you are in disagreement. It's not people who hate each other or trying to get at each other. It's people who want the best for each other but really clash on what that is. And that's why I think the idea of compassion, and I also wanted it to be, these people have real conflict, but they actually love each other and like each other. They're not trying to hurt each other.
I think that really comes through the empathy for each person's situation, is what I was trying to say, that even though they all have very different opinions about what's going on, and whether that's the hoarding or the sex stuff that goes on in the book or whatever it is, I think that you manage to make us appreciate that, that character's perception about that, that aspect. toddler behaviour. I think we might go to some questions.
We do, if there's any questions from the Zoom audience, please make sure that you pop them in the chat bar now, and Louis will be able to text them to me. But is there any questions here? Yes, all right.
Emily, that was wonderful. I was wondering if you can tell us more about the Charles Perkins Fellowship and what it was like on a day-to-day basis.
Could you just repeat that for Zoom?
Yeah, so the question was about the Charles Perkins Centre Writer in Residence Fellowship that I was lucky enough to get. It's this, as far as I know, unique writer in residence position. Charles Perkins Centre is at Sydney University. It's a medical research hub or facility that is focused on, I think they broadly say lifestyle diseases or non-communicable diseases. So the shorthand, definitely not the way they describe it, version of that is stuff you do to yourself. Smoking related, obesity related, you know, over drinking, liver problems, all that stuff. And so one of the great things there, because I wasn't writing directly about any of those things, is, so my big question I went in as the research project to apply for it was, how do you help someone who doesn't want to be helped and doesn't think they need to be, and should you? And because they do all this research there, but then it's like, we know all this stuff, how to solve all these health problems, but people keep doing the things. Yeah. What do we do? So, you know, like bring a novelist in. We just can think of lots of reasons. So day to day there, I had an office in the building, which just that alone was transformative for me, to have a room of one's own to work in, which I didn't have. I was squatting in libraries and stuff. But also I just had access to pretty much everyone who worked there, and at their hubs out in Western Sydney and Western New South Wales as well. And when I say access, I mean they humoured me a lot more than they would humour me if I was coming in without saying I'm a writer in residence at the Charles Perkins Centre. So they entertained my, at the start, pretty basic questions, and helped me get to a greater understanding, and included me sort of, so this is a place where they join together a lot of different disciplines. That's sort of the idea of it. That's why they brought a creative writer in. So there's biologists and neurologists, there's some physicists there, there's all these different disciplines. So to just be able to have access to those minds to talk through a lot of these questions, but I didn't have any obligations day to day. It's why it's a dream. And I spent the first 3 months waiting for someone to come in and say, you're busted, you're doing this wrong. Because I was just really free to do that. So to work in my office when I wanted to, and to go and bother scientists when I wanted to, and then later bother some of the people working at the RPA and Westmead Hospital as well. So like a total gift. People hear about it and say, that sounds too good to be true. I felt like that the whole way through it, and had to tell Tracy Sorensen, who got it after me, the writer, like she kept saying, yeah, but what do I have to do? I said, no, it is too good to be true, but it's true. So enjoy.
Is there anybody else? Yes.
Oh, hi Cass, nice to see you again. I didn't want to take away from anyone on Zoom, and I don't know if you've got anything prepared, but I would just love to hear you read something from the book.
Are you happy to do that?
Yeah, I'm happy to do it.
Sorry, it's not a question. It's a comment.
It's a request.
If someone else has a question,
That'll give the Zoom people a minute to think
yeah,
about it.
Okay. I think there was another question just there as well.
There was one next to you.
I am a big fan. Thank you for tonight. For this book, what came first? Was it character or story that gave you this?
It was definitely character. It pretty much always is for my novels. And in this instance, the story came pretty tight on the heels of that, because I did have this character in mind who I thought, had all this stuff, and I wanted to know about that. And yeah, so the story came pretty quickly out of that, but the character was definitely first, yeah.
Any more questions before we go into a reading from the audience? There's just one over here. Yep.
I haven't read your book yet, but I look forward to doing so.
Thank you.
I did read a review in probably the Sydney Morning Herald, which pointed out that there are people who are inveterate collectors, like they collect butterflies or model railroad equipment, and There's people who collect Grange wines, and the whole point of Grange wines is not to drink them, but to hoard
Just to
them.
collect it, yeah.
You know, and so what I'm getting at is that these things sort of call attention to the way that we marginalize people by calling them mentally ill or abnormal or whatever. Based on what? You know, because they're so-called normal people who do these things. And I've been interested in the categories of mental illness and psychological description for a long time. So I'm just, you know, I think if we marginalize people, then we're in the political realm. Your questioner talked about power issues, and I think those are quite relevant. Anyway, I don't know if you're able to respond to this any further, but I'm quite interested in that aspect of the work.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really rich thread of conversation for those who didn't hear it. The question is generally around the difference between people who are sort of considered normal, they collect things, Grange wines, whatever, things that other people might value, and people who are labelled with a mental illness. And that's one reason why I'm quite cautious around putting my own diagnosis or label on people as well, because I don't really want to be a part of that. Certainly class and wealth play a big part in this. But the collector of a specific item or thing, whatever it is, that is sort of a different behaviour than someone who collects everything and keeps everything. I don't think it should be morally different in how they're looked at or considered, but certainly in terms of their decision-making process, that can be quite different. But there is still something there in terms of, like, one of the examples I often go back to think about this is the American iconic artist Andy Warhol, who was, by any modern definition, he would be labelled a hoarder, and maybe people did label him that at the time. Before he died, he packaged, I think it's something like 216 boxes of stuff, and he gifted it as a collection to a gallery. And the things in that box is it's random. There's no order to it, and there's things that are incredibly valuable according to everyone, and things that are as an old napkin or something. And it's become art. Like, before COVID, this gallery would hold nights where other contemporary artists would come and they would open a box and they would go through it, and they would talk about this random ephemera through the lens of Andy Warhol was a genius. Now, if you did that with any, you know, the local person in the street who people complain about they have too much stuff, just go through the boxes, but go through a lens of this person is an artistic genius and has an eye for something special. You could do that. Every home I've been into that people were generous enough to talk to me about their stuff, that is how they talk about it. But Andy Warhol had already been considered and labelled a genius and an artist, therefore his hoard is considered art. And that's why the labels are so tricky, because of course they're coming from an external idea about what's normal, what are we meant to have, what are we meant to keep.
That's a great answer.
Yeah, great answer. So we might move to a bit of a reading, I reckon, before we finish.
I might just I'll just read from the start, I think.
Sure.
Might as well just get straight in. Nick's shoes had always worn unevenly. Pigeon-toed was what the ballet teacher, who was actually just an ordinary mum who lived in France for a year when she was younger, had called her. Such a pretty face, but those feet, the fake French ballet teacher would cry, patting 6-year-old Nick's smooth cheeks and gazing not at the terrible feet, but away from them at the school hall rafters. What would she say now, Nick wonders, watching each foot press its inside into the asphalt as it stepped. Such a sagging face. At last a match for your sloppy feet. Sagging face, sloppy feet, arse outgrowing its pants, right hip, which has, in the 3 years since she's turned 40, woken her most nights with its urgent ache. Not all bad, though, or else Jace from the stockroom, who goes to the gym every morning before work and wears tight shorts and tighter singlets to show how well that regime is working for him, wouldn't whistle appreciatively and call her gorgeous when she passed him. And Reg, the store's night manager, wouldn't stand far closer than polite in the break room and ask her for the 1,000th time if she wouldn't consider joining the night shift so he'd have something good to look at during the long quiet hours between 6 and closing. Night shift is better money, But aside from having to dodge reg, there's the matter of transport. Nick isn't a panicky person, not like her sister Michelle, who sees rapists and meth heads where there are only passing motorists and harmless neighbourhood kids. Still, even the calmest, most reasonable woman doesn't take 20-minute walks alone after midnight, or accept the no doubt insistent offer of a lift from the creepy manager finishing work at the same time. Besides, if she got home after midnight, she wouldn't get to sleep before 1, but would have to rise at 6 anyway to make sure the cats didn't howl the neighbourhood awake in hunger. Besides, if she didn't walk home in the bright, clear light of afternoon, she would miss so much. Like the newly pasted telegraph pole poster telling whoever passes to lose weight now. She tears a tab off and slips it into her uniform pocket to nestle with the Secrets of Your Soul Tarot business card she picked up from the shopping centre information desk this morning, and the kebab shop receipt with today's queue number 14 in thick black texture on the top. On second thought, she unsticks the whole poster, working carefully so the bits of tape come away with the paper, folds it in 3 so the tabs are safely tucked away. She would miss things like the way this pair of sneakers looks ready to chuck on the inside edge and yet near new on the outer. Is it time to swap them with one of the pairs she bought in Kmart's January sale? Or should she wait until the canvas wears right through? Like the fact the diamond chip in Mum's engagement ring is not sparkling as it should in the late afternoon sun. Michelle, who wears Mum's plain gold wedding band, told Nick to keep it sparkly with a monthly bath of half hydrogen peroxide, half Windex. But that was typical Michelle over fussiness. Dishwashing liquid, warm water, soft toothbrush, good as new. She'll do it tonight while watching maths. She wouldn't see the peeling polish on her left index finger. A raw pink spot at the edge of an otherwise perfectly glossy lavender finish. How long had it been that way? All day she looks at her own hands without seeing them. Product scanning robots. Only on the walk home do they become part of her again. Only now can she see their messiness and feel the shame of it. She should have expected this. The lavender polish had been gloopy and her usual solution of acetone drops had not sufficiently thinned it. She'd known it and now look. She'd missed things like the mustard-coloured envelope slipped under the windscreen wipers of a shiny black Jeep in the no parking zone outside of the nursing home. Some people had so much money they treated a ticket as a minor fee for the convenience of parking wherever they damn well liked. Never used to see those kinds of people in Leichhardt. The owner of this car probably didn't even know anyone in the home. Another scavenger tracking which old ladies were due to die next, leaving their unrenovated 1960s houses to be bought cheap, flipped and sold within a month for millions. Nick picks the parking fine from beneath the wiper blade and drops it into her handbag, next to the empty Coke bottle from lunch and the Thermomix pamphlet from the pop-up stall outside the shopping centre toilets. If she walked home at night, she would not see treasures like the doll's bonnet. She at first thinks baby's bonnet, but not even a newborn's head could be so tiny, surely. The bonnet that winks at her from under the swings in the park 3 doors from her house. It must have been dropped only that afternoon, so unblemished by dust or dog piss or cigarette ash is the white brocade. When she holds it up close, she can see that a length of shiny satin ribbon meant to act as an under-chin tie has been attached to each side, but unevenly and in a jagged stitch. A handmade bonnet, imperfectly made, but so clean and crisp it hurts her heart to think how the one who sewed it would feel about its casual discarding. She pulls a scrunched plastic bag from her jacket pocket, shakes it smooth, and gently places the bonnet inside. So much she would miss if she were to walk home in the dark with only the 2 far apart streetlights to guide her.
Yeah!
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. And I think really demonstrates that this book, despite addressing all of those huge themes that we talked about, is really highly readable and accessible as well. And it's, you know, it is a book about tragedy and need and brokenness and emptiness, but it also sparkles with wit and humour and, you know, a lot of heartwarming scenes and a lot about connection and belonging, I think. So I would encourage everybody to buy many copies of this book. Thank you so much, Emily, for speaking with us tonight. Thanks to everybody on Zoom.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. It has been absolutely fascinating. And from
this hoarder and daughter of 2 generations of hoarder, I will be hoarding this book amongst my 70,000 other books. So to make the signing possible, and for those who are still on Zoom, if you do want a personally signed copy, you just need to call us on 3846 3422 07 3846 3422, and if you pay for your book over the phone, we can get it signed personally to you now at the signing time. But for everybody here, you don't have to call. You can just come up to the counter. So we're going to get Emily to come to a signing table, and then we're going to join her.